Hi, so in this video today I'm going to be looking at rearranging formulae with you. So I've got 4 examples here, and you'll notice I've got a 5th one down here which is actually the same example, and I'll come on to why I've written it out twice in a moment. So first of all I want to have a look at what it says at the top here. So it says make X the subject of these formulae, and what's important you understand about that is if it says make X the subject, then basically what we want to happen is we want to end up with X equals something, alright? So no other numbers or letters with it, just X equals, and then everything else needs to be on the other side of the equation. So let's look at the first one. I've kept them nice and simple, and you'll find that they get progressively more difficult, and I will be putting on some more videos of more complicated formulae for you to rearrange. So to start with, we've got P equals X plus R. Don't be put off by the fact we've got loads of letters everywhere. Just treat it in exactly the same way as you would treat it if it was an equation rather than a formula where you've just got letters and very few, if any, numbers. So here, P equals X plus R. We want X to be on its own. At the moment it's with a plus R, so in order to deal with that we have to get rid of plus R, and we do that by doing the inverse operation. The inverse operation of a plus is a minus, so we're just going to subtract R from both sides of the equation. What that means is we end up with P minus R is equal to X. Now I always believe that if we're going to make X the subject, it should be at the beginning, so although we have got the answer because X is on its own, we ought to start with X. So to finish off, I always think it's right to write it that way round. X equals P minus R, and that's your answer. The second one here, we've got A equals XY. Now you've just got to remember that XY means X times Y, and so therefore if I want to undo a times, I just divide. So A equals XY. In order to deal with that, I'm going to need to divide by the y, okay? To represent divide, when we've got algebra, we normally put a fraction bar. So we're going to divide both sides of the formula by y. So if I do A divided by y, I'm going to write it like that. And if I divide xy by y, the y's cancel out and I'm just left with an x. And just like I did here, I think it's then only right that we write it this way round so that we end up with X equals at the end. Number 3 then, we have U equals V plus 5X. So we've got 2 things to deal with here. So we've got the V added on and the 5 which is multiplied to the X. Now with BIDMAS, if you remember, and I've talked about BIDMAS before, normally we follow our order of operations. So we brackets, then the indices, then the division multiplication, and then the addition and subtraction on those kind of 4 levels. So multiplication and division happens before adding and subtracting, but if we're rearranging, we're reversing that process, we're undoing it. So imagine it's like wrapping a present. So you might get the present, put it in a box, fold up the box, stick it down, get the wrapping paper, put that on, then maybe put a bow around the outside if you're going to be really fancy with it. If you then want to open that present, you don't start with what's in the middle in the box, you actually go from the outside. Okay, so you take off the ribbon, then the wrapping paper, then open the box, then there's the present. And it's the same with rearranging a formula. So the last thing is always the first thing that gets undone. So we work backwards through BIDMAS. So the first thing that we need to undo then is the plus V. So the inverse of plus V is to take it away. So we're going to take away V from both sides of the equation. So we have U minus V is equal to 5x. And then if you remember, 5x means 5 times x. So to undo 5 times x, we're just going to divide by 5. And we do that on both sides. So we end up with U minus V, and remember we can use a fraction bar to represent divide. Divided by 5 is equal to x. And again, just to finish it off, it's better to write out what x is. Okay. Right, number 4 then. Now there's a couple of ways you can answer any of these questions, to be honest with you, but I'm just showing you what I think are the best approaches. So for this question here, we've got w equals y minus 6x. Now, you should always, don't forget, undo the adding and subtracting and then undo the multiplication. But I'm going to add another step in before we even get to that point here. And that's because looking at this, the letter that I want to make the subject, which is x, is negative. So I would always recommend that you make it positive first. And the way you do that is actually just by adding it to both sides of the equation. If you add 6x, you get w plus 6x equals y. Okay? Because we had a minus 6x here, if I add 6x, that goes away completely. But if I add 6x, it's over here. So we haven't changed the formula at all. All we've done is rearrange it slightly, but we have now got a positive amount of x. And now we can do exactly what we've done in the previous examples. So the first thing I need to get rid of is w, so I'm going to subtract w from both sides of the equation, giving me 6x equals y minus w. And then I'm going to divide by 6, because I've got 6x I want to divide by 6. Now you can, of course, if you go back to here, you can do it by straight away taking away the y and then dividing by minus 6, and you will get an answer that looks a little bit different, but it will be an equivalent answer. And if you want to do that and then tell me what you've got, that's absolutely fine, but I would always recommend, if you have a negative amount of x, first thing to do would be to make it positive and then rearrange it. Right, moving on to the last one then. Now I've written it out twice because there are two main ways of answering this question. So we have a multiplied by this bracket, which is where your x is equal to c. Now if, as I've just said, it's a times the bracket, because there's nothing here, no symbol, no plus, no minus or anything else, so it's always going to be a multiplier. Now if we've got a multiplied by a bracket, what we can do, and this makes it really simple, is we can just divide by that letter. So if we divide both sides by a, well then there is no need for the brackets anymore because there's nothing outside them, and we're just left with c over a. And then all we have to do, I want x to be the subject, I just have to add b. We do the inverse operation. The inverse of minus b is to add b, so we end up with x equals c over a plus b. And there's your answer. Nice and simple and straightforward. But that might not be your instinct. You might not think to do that. What you might think is, I've seen brackets, I want to multiply them out. And that's fine as well. So let's have a look at what happens if we do it that way. So if we multiply out these brackets, we've got a times x, which is ax, a times minus b, which is minus ab, is equal to c. Now the same as the other questions, the first thing we need to do is get rid of the bit that's been added on, the minus ab, and we get rid of that by doing the inverse operation, which is plus, okay? And we're left with ax equals c plus ab, and then we want to get rid of the a, and we do that by doing the inverse operation, which is to divide by a, because it's ax, which means multiply, and to do that we end up with then x equals c plus ab over a, and that is your answer. Now that tells you that these two must be exactly the same equation or formula, and they are. If you think about writing this in a different way, we could write it as c over a plus ab over a, so we can write those two parts out separately. The a's here cancel and we get the same equation. So there we have it. That's how you rearrange some formulae, and as I say, I'll do some more complicated ones with you before, but just remember to, if you like, reverse BIDMAS. So what was the last thing that happened? That's the first thing that needs to be undone. Okay, so if you think back to this question here, you would have done the brackets first and then multiplied. So the first thing that we undid was the multiply, and then we undid what was inside the brackets. Okay, so just remember that little piece of information. This is just an alternative way of doing it, because you are able to multiply out the brackets, and then it just gives you a different approach. Either is absolutely fine. Okay.